Welcome to the Andrew Holland Podcast, where we talk about business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Now, here's your host, Andrew Holland.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Andrew Holland Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Holland. I'm a businessman. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a CPA that's worked in the corporate world, and I've worked in the investment and financial services industry. I've also started multiple companies that have achieved millions of dollars in sales, and I've sold companies with multi-million-dollar valuations. You can find more about my background at our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com. Follow me on Twitter, Holland Podcast, to join us in conversations that we have outside of the podcast every week. Lastly, subscribe to our YouTube channel, the Andrew Holland Podcast, so that you get weekly updates every time we post the video version of the podcast on Wednesdays. Thank you so much for joining us each and every week to talk about business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. This week, I have a fellow CPA joining us on the podcast, Dave Adler. And Dave Adler has a really incredible story because at the age of 46 or 47, he dove into the world of entrepreneurism. And his story is very inspirational and motivating. Dave, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the Andrew Holland Podcast.
Thanks, Andrew. Glad to be here.
So many things that I want to cover with you. And I don't think I've ever told you this, but your story is one of the most inspirational entrepreneur stories that I have heard. And the reason is because at the age of, what was it, 55?
47, actually.
47.
Right,
You
yeah.
left the corporate world, you got
Yeah.
sick of it, and you became an entrepreneur. I want to hear how that transpired. And you and I have been friends for a long time.
Right.
But take us back before we get to that. Take us back. What was your childhood like? What did your parents do? How did you know eventually, and maybe you didn't, that you were an entrepreneur and that this is something that you wanted to pursue? Did you have an upbringing of entrepreneurs? What did your parents do? So take us back and then bring us to today.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Marshfield, bigger than the city I'm working in now, but town about 15,000 growing up. My dad was a self-employed pharmacist for most of my childhood, and we also had in the store he had an ice cream shop. I'm one of five children in the family. So mom sold wigs, and she had a little salon in the pharmacy as well as she sold sewing machines. So we were kind of like a mini Walgreens slash Walmart before they got popular. But yeah, the five of us kids. I mean, I've probably been working since fourth grade. Helping dad deliver prescriptions. And
Yeah.
but basically, I didn't get to play baseball because I was the five of us that was the one sport I always wanted to try. But the five of us kids were the labor for dad's business, and I don't think dad had a vacation probably until I was maybe 17 when one of the local mass retailers offered to buy him out, and so
Wow.
yeah, and so basically, in some ways, I work with a lot of farmers, but in many ways, my life was a lot like a farming life, except we weren't on the farm. The family was always together. Basically, the five kids, for the most part, um, we, we either scooping ice cream, delivering prescriptions, or doing something else to help out mom and dad. Um, there were times when we had. I'll never forget. There was one time mom and I went to the grocery store, and we had a little calculator. I mean, we had just like an exact amount of money she knew she could spend on food. And I don't know why that's always stuck with me, but maybe, I mean, it's probably shaped my life in some ways because I'm not a spendthrift by any means, but so yeah, we've been, that's just kind of how I was raised. Like I said, when I was sophomore or junior is when my dad entered the corporate world, when one of the retailers bought him out. But
So what year was that when you were fourth grade, or what time frame are we talking about where you with your siblings were daily in the pharmacy and the ice cream shop helping your parents out?
Well, let's see. When I started, let's see, if I was in fourth grade, and that was before, that was way before the ice cream shop was a few years later. But
Okay.
let's see, what's fourth grade? So it's 5 or 9, probably about 74,
Okay. So this is the
1974,
early
75.
70s.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, right,
Okay.
right.
And so how long had when did your dad start he started as a pharmacy, right?
Right.
A
Yep.
pharmacist, you said, but
Yep.
did he branch out into like the grocery and, small knickknacks or what have you?
Well, not really groceries, but it's funny because he had a lot of on his shelf. I mean, before he got into, I think was looking for something he and mom could do together. And so
Okay.
mom got involved with a company at the time called the Trust Chic Wig Company or something. So she went out to Utah after training, but so that was. Then they got, I don't know. I think we had massage chairs for a while too, but
Wow.
yeah. But dad, no, I mean it wasn't a real big. I mean it was a pretty small physical space that we were in. But dad must have worked with, like, Marshall had a lot of farmers in the area too. And I still remember. I'm going to show you this little. So this is something called. I don't know if you can see that bag balm. Can you read
Yeah,
that?
I can. Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I remember
Is
seeing
that from
things.
your shop?
No, actually, one of my clients gave it to me, but that's something that we used to sell at our store. And so Dad had like this one little area of shelving where they had like little things like the big syringes that you would use to put like pills down cows' mouths and things. So he had
Yeah.
like these little like side area where like there were like little knickknacks that some of the farmers could come in and buy things as well. But I'll never forget that bag balm. Because of course, as a young boy, I'm giggling at not knowing what it was. But yeah, you can understand what I was thinking.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, basically, it's like Vaseline for the cow's udders, basically, because it gets
Yeah.
so thick. But no, it's just funny how everything kind of goes full circle because I didn't know half these people were farmers, like coming into Marshfield at the time. But um,
Well, and it's
so
funny the
anyway,
memories that stick with you. The
yeah,
little memories and as much as whether we realize it or not, those are so important in our development and they come back. And
right,
what's interesting about your story and about so many entrepreneurs that I've talked with is this sense of entrepreneurism is and I'm a big believer you're either born an entrepreneur or you're not. But if you are, and it's fostered at a young age, like it was for you because your parents were entrepreneurs, again, that supports my theory that you're either born or you're not. It kind of runs through families.
yeah,
Although many people disagree with that, and I've had good conversation with previous guests about that. But you grew up with going to the shop every single day, like a strong work ethic. You got customer service at such a young age. You saw the toll that it took on your family in terms of your dad didn't get a vacation until you were 17 years old. And that's what it takes to be an
hmm,
entrepreneur.
right, right.
So tell me about your dad's sales when you're about 17. Some of the big retailers come to buy his shop. Who bought him out?
Well, there's a big Shopco, which is no longer
Okay.
the department store, but they're no longer around. But basically, Dad was having a very hard time competing, because Walgreens came into the market, Kmart, which
Yeah.
is no longer around, but Kmart had a pharmacy. Um, you know, Walmart was not in town yet; they weren't around yet at that point. But Shopko was a big pharmacy in town, and Dad just couldn't. He really couldn't compete, because with the volume prices, for what he had to charge his clients. And
Yeah.
he was getting tired, I think, and quite honestly, Dad died at a young age of cancer, at 63. And
Wow.
I still think in many ways, there's a lot of evidence that over too much stress can be a significant contributing factor to cancer. And I to this
No
day, I
question.
think, I mean, we have it in my family, but I think that didn't help either because I it's funny because I when Dad was sick, we talked a lot about things, and I did not know. He would tell me that because he and Mom always put on this strong front, like everything was good. We didn't know any better. They sent us to private schools from grade school through high school, and that wasn't cheap. In fact, I was a janitor. I was working as a janitor from like sophomore year on in my high school, just to help pay for our schooling. But
Wow.
yeah, I would get up at 5 o'clock every morning and go clean locker rooms. And, yeah, I could tell you some little stories about that as well.
Well,
some of the sites that I saw, but
oh, I don't even. This,
you
this
know,
is a G-rated podcast,
yeah,
so we don't want to know about those sites.
yeah.
But again, I just love that you're up at 5 a.m. every single morning. We were the same way growing up on a hobby farm, and but I want to focus in on, okay, so your dad sells the business.
Mhm.
How old was he when he sold the business?
Let's see. He was probably mid to late 40s, I would think.
Okay, and when was he
Ballpark.
diagnosed with cancer?
He was diagnosed at age 60, and then he died.
Okay.
They fought it for 3 years before it took his life.
So you got to spend some time with him, hopefully, by the time he sold his business, go on a vacation with him at the age of 17, and 10 to 15 years before he ultimately passed away.
Yeah, and I don't know that. And actually, we never really took. So what we did for vacations, we had a camper, and we would we would drive it down to, because Warren's, Wisconsin wasn't too far from. I mean, it was probably about a little over an hour drive from where I grew up. So Dad would park that camper at Jellystone Park down in Warren's, and so the mom and the kids would stay down there, and Dad would drive down after work every night. I mean, that was kind of our vacation. Um,
Yeah.
but we don't. I don't know that we ever took. I mean, I don't think that I ever really took a real vacation until I was out of law school, probably.
Wow.
No, I take that back. I went on spring break once in college, but
Sure.
but mom, but once, as we got older, mom and dad were able to get away, and my little sister and her husband were stationed out in Hawaii for a while. He was in the Navy, so they got to go out to Hawaii. They traveled a little bit with my mom or with my older brother. So but most of us were out of school before they were able to do anything from a vacation standpoint.
So you're an attorney, you're a CPA, your dad sells a business 17. Take us from 17 and kind of what your life story goes like up until you decide to buy your current business, Dave Adler CPA and Advisors.
Oh, let's see. Well, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I mean, when I was growing up, I mean, my real love was music growing up. I was a trombone player, and I really
I didn't
wanted to
know
be
that.
yeah, I really wanted to be a professional jazz trombonist
Wow.
when I was young.
Okay.
I didn't take a business class in my life until I got to college. Um, I was horrible at industrial arts. My brother had all those skills. I couldn't put two pieces of wood together without cracking the cracking the wood, or I was a disaster. But I
That sounds
love
like me and
music.
my brother.
Yeah, and I just had I had a real love for jazz music, but I had a really bad experience with one of my so my band teacher. I had one of my favorite instructors in my life. He left after my sophomore year, maybe
Is
my
this
junior
college or high school?
high school. Yeah,
Okay.
and
Yep.
they hired this gal who we just did not get along, and she was really kind of a nasty human being in many ways to me. Um, Without getting it, I mean, well, there were some things she was doing that I knew she was doing because I was a
Yeah.
janitor, so I was like sweeping floors after school, and I never really said anything to the administration. I probably should have, but she knew that I was aware of some of these things, and anyway, it just made it just changed our relationship, and she actually it just left me a real sour taste in my mouth. But anyway, my
For
parents
for
were
music and for jazz specifically.
well, yeah, I don't know why, but it's because
Too
she
bad.
really it wasn't that she discouraged me so much, but it just really turned me off to the whole, and I can't really tell you why. Um, I mean, as an example, she had the one music award that they give out in high school to seniors, at least when I was growing up, was called the John Philip Sousa Award, and she said to my face it was like that spring that I was graduating. She said, if we were to give out the award, you would get it, but because you would get it, I'm not giving it out this year. I mean, just petty things like
Wow.
that
She
just leave like
told
a
you
bad.
that?
Yeah, she did. And so anyway, I don't know. And but and then backing up a little bit, my parents were kids of the Depression era. I mean, their parents were, and my dad was always pushing me just to do something quote unquote practical.
Mhm.
Because just be and the one thing that I think was that I do regret a little bit was the fact that um, it was always drilled in my head, just be happy, just be glad you got a job, kind of thing. Don't necessarily go into follow your heart as much as get a job first and follow that later.
And that
Um,
was a common theme during that era. It
Oh yeah,
was it doesn't
yeah,
just provide for your family, whether you like it or not, just go get a job and make sure you're providing for your family. I mean,
yeah.
that post World War II era, pre and post, because of that's what they did. They just
Right.
worked their tails off, as your dad was a perfect example of. And even if it wasn't, as you described, following your heart, he just did it because his family was the most important thing to him. And that can be, there can be advantages to that, but there can also be some real disadvantages. And I want to talk about that more a
Yeah.
little bit later on once we get to your business.
Well, I think it's limiting to some degree. I mean, not intentionally, but it's but I'll be honest with you. Between that being told to me and actually going to college, I think were my two biggest things that were held that I felt were really hurdles for me in my life. But we can talk about that later.
So
But
going
no,
to college was a hurdle for you?
yeah, in my life, and because we didn't, there was no such thing. Like I know you had like an entrepreneurial curriculum that you went through in college, but you know, and I've got a good friend of mine I used to work with when I was down at Deloitte, in Indianapolis, and we still talk about to this day about how you're so grilled to be this is the conventional way that you do things. And you don't. There was no thinking outside the box. You had you had your books, your academic ways of thinking, and if you went to college, if you got a business degree, you did this. I mean, there was you followed the corporate rules and ladders, and um, I just for some reason between that and me and being told I should be just get a good practical position. I mean, education was always pushed hard in my family, and I
Hmm.
don't regret that at all. I don't know
Right.
that I really learned a whole lot, to be honest with you, that was practical for real life, um, but it was still, I mean, it was a great experience. But anyway, backing up, so again, I bounced around a little bit. I started heading when I went to college. I thought because Dad was a pharmacist, I have two nurses that are I have a sister who's a pharmacist, two sisters who are nurses, and my oldest brother, my one brother went to he went into business, and
Okay.
but I
Where did you go to
figured,
college?
pardon me,
Where did you go to college?
University of Wisconsin Eau Claire.
Okay. You went to UWC.
Yep,
Okay.
yep, and then well, I started out. We had a 2-year school, so to get my associate's degree. We had a 2-year school at UW Marshfield, Wood
Okay.
County at the time, and I lived like 3 blocks from there. So I spent my first year there. Transferred down to Madison my first semester at as a sophomore because I thought I was going to head into one of the healthcare fields. I was thinking either pharmacy or physical therapy. And I coming from a high school where my class was about 87 people. It was a small high school class. I was very intimidated by the whole Madison scene at the time. I probably wasn't mature enough or ready for that volume of people. You'd walk down the street, and I was used to saying hello to everybody.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'd look at people as they're walking by. I'd about to say hi, and they go, "Ah," and they look right down,
Yeah.
and just mass human beings, and I don't know that I probably wasn't ready to move away yet, to be honest with you, and so
Yeah, because Marshfield is a small Wisconsin town and everybody knows everybody and it's a very friendly, it's you see someone on the street, you know them, you know who they are, you say, "How are you doing?" You know their family. Whereas
right.
you move to, you must have been visiting Madison, is what I'm understanding from what you're saying. You went to visit and you realized that wasn't the place for you?
Oh no, I enrolled for the first semester as a sophomore.
Oh, at Madison, UW Madison.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
in my
Okay.
sophomore year. I'm sorry, but
I didn't realize that.
I think part of the issue was I was so my family and I, because we were always together like that. It was it was hard. I think for me leaving home was really hard initially,
Yeah,
and
understandably so.
I kind of went into this panic mode. And when I was younger, I was pretty impulsive about things. But I should,
Mhm.
looking back, probably would have been good had I stayed there at least a year. But I just remember I was sitting and I love chemistry. I mean, I was really good at it. But I was sitting in chem lab one day when I was down in Madison. I thought, I just can't see myself doing this. And not that I would have been in chemistry forever, but there's a lot of chemistry that goes into pharmacy, the school of
Yeah.
pharmacy and pharmacology, and and I don't know. I ended up transferring to UW Eau Claire my second semester as a sophomore, and
Which is a
again,
great school.
oh
I mean,
yeah,
it's a great school. It's my
but
alma mater, and they had a fantastic business school. My guess
Right.
is they still do, although I've heard there's been a little bit of turnover in the teaching profession. It's really hard to get great professors in this day and age, especially in a town like Eau Claire when some of the bigger places can pay so much more. But
Right.
so you go to Eau Claire. Do you graduate from the business school?
I did, but but I wasn't even going there for business. I mean, again, I had no business was like the last thing on my radar at that point.
Sure.
Um, I bounced initially between. I thought, okay, I thought, music again. I thought, I started down the path of music therapy, and I don't know why that changed. And I've always been a big political junkie too. And
Okay.
well, you know that, but
Well, yeah, I mean,
I
you're
mean,
basically describing me
yeah,
when I hear you talk because
yeah. And so
we have a
I
lot in
was,
common.
so my must have been my probably my first semester. I took some political science courses, and I really enjoyed them. But again, the practical side of me was thinking, you know, this poli sci is great, but what are you going to do with that degree other than teach?
Yeah.
At least at the time, and I didn't want to teach. So again, what did I do? I just kind of fell into accounting. Right. Well, I felt my first business course was accounting 101, and
Hmm.
and hardest course I ever took, I think, initially, because that was the only C I ever got in college. Was my first accounting class.
Really?
Yeah, but I went, so I ended up graduating in finance, but I had to have, I had to have those basic accounting courses. And,
Hmm.
but again, I had no background in it. I had no prior experience with it. And, yeah, whoever thought I'd be doing this for a living, but,
Well, so I want to get from 22, age 22, 23 to what just before you buy the business relatively quickly. So you
yeah,
graduate college, you with finance major.
yep.
Give us the next 20 to 30 years in
Um,
on speed
Well,
dial.
okay, so I went to law school right after college, and
Okay.
I didn't know that I would ever really practice law, but I thought, I figured it would give me more options in my future having that law degree than just doing like a straight MBA, for example. And I was
Yep.
not a big fan of school. I had an opportunity to work for a big insurance company right out of college, which I initially accepted, but then I got accepted to law school, and I thought, if I'm not going to do it now, I never will. So I went to school right away. And
What
so
law
anyway,
school?
yeah, yeah. I
What law?
graduated from UW
What law?
Madison.
Oh, Madison. Okay.
Yeah. And so 3 years after college, I graduated from law school. Um, took a few tax courses, which I really enjoyed because basically taxation is nothing but social engineering. And so I kind of got interested in work from one of the big six at the time, big four now, but international accounting firms. And they really liked my background, but they wanted me to be ready to sit for the CPA exam before they'd hire me, because they a lot of the big accounting firms hire attorneys, but then they were getting burned because attorneys would get hired there, and then they just as a job to start out, and they'd leave right away. So I basically had a year off where I was taking some classes via extension to sit for the exam. So my first job out of law school, a year out, was with Deloitte and Touche.
Okay, so just to give our listeners a little bit of a background. So if you want to be a CPA, and I think this was the case back then, but correct me if I'm wrong. So typically when people graduate college, if it's a 4 year, they have 120 credits. Well, in order to sit for the CPA exam, you have to have a minimum of 150 credits. And then there's 4 different exams that you have to pass. What you're saying is that you had graduated with a undergraduate degree, then you had your law school classes, but you didn't have 150 credit hours yet to sit for the CPA exam. So you took a little bit of break to get those hours and eventually sat for the 4 CPA exams and got a job offer and worked with Deloitte and Touche. You said it was big six. In the accounting world, there's always been big eight, big six. It's been
Mhm.
consolidating. In this day and age, 2023, there's the big four:
Right.
Ernst & Young, Deloitte and Touche, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and KPMG. So that's all accurate, what you just described, that timeline?
Yeah, the only thing that's different is that they did not have the 150 credit. Um, they did not have the 150 credit requirement at that point. It was 120. But
Oh, okay.
they did hire me. But they did hire me before I sat for the exam, which is
Okay.
cool because so I well, real quickly, I don't want this. I don't. We could get way off track, but I moved down to Cincinnati with a good friend of mine. He was down there in grad school, and I was working in all in a very interesting story. So I was working in a little deli in this office tower in downtown Cincinnati, right across
When
from.
was this? After you graduated law school?
Yeah, it was like
Okay.
between 1990 and 1991 when I
Okay.
spent my year down there. The summer of basically a year and a half there, um, and I was serving, and it was really kind of cool because it was a black owned deli, so I was the only white guy that worked there, and which was really a very interesting experience because
Yeah.
Marshfield is pretty much all white, but I don't know, I really loved learning, kind of understanding, the different cultures, so to speak, and um, just different perspectives of where people from the city came, I mean, just from the city, but also like the black community. And yeah, I used to walk through really interesting neighborhoods on the way to work. And I mean, me being naive and stupid, I mean, they may have been very dangerous areas, but I was just sitting, shoot the breeze with people. And but anyway, so I was serving almost every day to lunch. I was talking to a guy, just this really nice guy. I never knew what he did, but one day I finally said to him, I said, "Where do you work at?" And he goes, "Well, I'm the regional human resource guy for Deloitte and Touche." And he was working upstairs in the building, and I just kind of in jest said, "You don't want to give me a job, do you?" And he goes, "Well, what do you?" He goes, "I figured you were in school." He goes, "I thought maybe you want to work in our mailroom." And I said, "No, I graduated from law school." And then he goes, "Oh, so." One thing led to another, and that's how I got hired. And he said, "Would you be willing to relocate to Indiana?" I said, "Absolutely." And so, that's how I got in, through the back door through Deloitte
That's
and
such a
Touche.
great story, Dave. I mean, you
Yeah,
weren't
it
looking for
wasn't.
it, but you were
Yeah,
working at a deli and you take interest in other people and eventually you ask someone just out of the blue, "What do you do?" And look at how that changed the trajectory, quite
right,
frankly, of
right,
your career and your life.
yeah.
Okay, so you get a job at Deloitte& and Touche, and how long are you there for? You moved to Indiana for them. How long are you there for?
About 3.5 years.
Okay,
Yeah,
and then
I
what
mean,
transpires?
to be honest with you, it was leaving there was probably the dumbest career move I could have made at that point, because I mean I had a really good thing going, but so I ended up coming back to Wisconsin, and there's a firm like kind of in the second tier of accounting firms that used to be named Grant Thornton, and
Mhm.
a recruiter called me, and I really wasn't looking to leave Indiana, but of course it was back in Madison. I loved living in Madison when I was in law school. Um, and they you know gave me the whole song and dance. We're just like the big eight, big six at the time, but we're just a little bit smaller, and complete stupid move. I mean, it was so I just kind of my again, that was my heart, not my head, and and so I kind of floundered for by. I was there a year, but I was so bored I had to get out of there. I mean, literally, I'm spending like doing like this during tax season,
Wait,
and
that it was the revert that was your head, not your heart making that move, right?
no, that was my heart wanting to go back to Madison.
Oh, I see,
Yeah,
okay.
I'm sorry, but so I bounced. I mean, so from there I bounced around a little bit. I went to after a year there. I worked for Ernst and Young for about a year and a half or so. Um, couldn't stand the culture, to be honest with you. Again, I was very naive because I didn't. I thought because we at Deloitte we had an awesome culture. We were kind of a mid. It was a small office and for a huge firm, and we were all we were young. We worked hard. We played hard. And I thought, oh, it's this way everywhere, right? And yeah, EY was I have to watch what I say, but the culture at the
Well,
time in Milwaukee was nothing like the culture I was used to, and it just
it's interesting you say that,
yeah,
because I've heard that. So when I graduated college, as you know, I went to the cities and went with
yeah,
Ernst and Young, and the
right,
culture you just described of Deloitte and Touche was exactly what we had. But there's always a little look at us wonky CPAs, and I promise to all the listeners we'll get past this point because Dave and I could talk forever about this. But it our I had friends from Deloitte and Touche, a lot of them, and our cultures were very similar. But I've heard exactly what you've described. Everybody has different experiences at different firms, and of course, you were in Milwaukee, which is very, very different than
right,
Minneapolis. So
yeah,
I think that can have a big impact on firm culture. So, but long story short, is you bounce around for a little while. I want to fast forward to when you're 44, 45. You're
yeah,
working at, well, then it's M&I, which eventually got bought out by BMO Harris Bank. That's when you and I got to know each other, when we first got connected, I believe.
right,
Um, Fast forward, you're in the
yeah.
trust department, and tell me how you how the opportunity to buy the CPA firm came up and how you got the courage to make that jump. Give us insight into those days.
Okay, well, I was well. Okay, a little back up really quick. I moved back to Eau Claire when in 1998 because that's when my dad was sick. And
Okay.
so I decided to move because at the time I was living back down in Indiana, and I moved back home, worked for a very small firm for about a year, and bounced around a little bit. But I worked for Norrie and Company, Norrie, and then I worked for Whiffley for about a year and a half. Clifton
These are
Gunderson.
all accounting firms for our
Yeah,
listeners
I'm
who don't
sorry.
know these companies.
Yeah, I had to leave Clifton Gunderson because they left the market so I didn't have a job basically. So then I practiced law up the street at a law firm for about 5 years. Got a call from the regional wealth manager or the head of the wealth management in Eau Claire because he and I had known each other for several years, looking for a trust administrator. So anyway, things were going fine there, but then BMO Harris acquired M&I. So I was a trust officer / administrator for the wealth management group. Um, After the acquisition, it was real clear that things were changing. I mean,
Hmm.
it's like if it was funny because I was talking to some people and and I'm thinking, if you can't see what's happening, you get your head in the sand, because, Eau Claire did not fit the footprint and everything was the Chicago way, which is completely different. Uh, the wealth management group, you could tell Eau Claire was not, the portfolios were not big enough. They were trying to emulate everything Wells Fargo was doing, to be honest with you. And
Yeah, so to
so,
give our listeners a little bit of background, so M&I was really a Wisconsin-based financial institution. They did have some branches in Florida and Arizona. 2008 came along. They were, quite frankly, pretty irresponsible in Florida and Arizona, and so they essentially needed to get bought out. Otherwise, they probably weren't going to continue to exist. So the shareholders voted to sell to BMO Harris Bank. BMO, Bank of Montreal, is a huge bank out of Canada, but they had a United States branch based out of, as Dave said, Chicago, known as BMO Harris Bank. And so BMO Harris Bank comes in. Well, it really was BMO. They bought Harris Bank, and they
Harris Bank,
also,
yeah,
yeah, a few years before, and then they bought M&I. And so what you're describing is what's often happens when a smaller regional bank gets bought out by a larger, more corporate bank. Is some of those regional offices become more corporatized and the culture changes a little bit. And you're saying what you saw, especially on the wealth management side, it was pretty clear that, and especially in trust, that's a volume game. I mean, the margins are very small and it's a volume game. So, as you said, your portfolio in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, in the western part of Wisconsin, just can't be the size necessarily that it can be in
right,
Chicago. And so
yeah,
you saw that culture changing, correct?
yeah. I could see it, especially, and then when the head of our wealth management group got transferred over to Minneapolis, that was
Mm,
pretty clear what was coming.
yeah.
Even though he was still in charge of the Eau Claire market. So, anyway, it was at that point where I knew I had to. It kind of like that's kind of what spurred me to finally get off my butt and do what I wanted to do. Because because I practiced at about every accounting firm locally that I could have. I practiced law about the only firm that I wanted to, and I'd gone up and down the street where those firms were at. I was running out of opportunities, but I started looking around and just a really weird. I was doing a search on just on the internet one day about looking for any kind of firms, any businesses for sale, and it just so happened that this group out of Indianapolis, of all places, very small world, because this had a listing for a practice in Bloomer, which is 25 miles north of Eau Claire. And I mean I knew nothing about Bloomer. I still live in Eau Claire, but so I thought I drove up here just to see what kind of commute it would be, and I kind of circled around the building a few times, and and so I actually inquired about it. Well, it turned out that this business broker happened to be a really good friend of a guy I used to work with down in Indianapolis, so we hit it off right away. And one thing led to another, and it's like it would. It took a while for this thing to get through. I mean, the business deal should have been done um, probably 3 months before it was, and just as things work out, I was waiting for. I had a job opportunity down in Dallas, because I wasn't sure if this was really the right fit or not, if it was going to work out. Because there's, when you buy these small businesses, there's always a bit of a risk because you just don't know what the attrition rate's going to be. You kind of inherit some employees that you're not sure because I didn't meet any of these people until the deal was done, and they had no idea that I was coming in. But
Yeah, because you have a confidentiality agreement and you're
yeah,
talking about a CPA firm. So it's not like you have a whole bunch of inventory or anything that can be used to
it's
value
all
the
blue
business.
sky, right?
It's all blue sky. It's really service contracts, and there aren't really service contracts. So you have to hope to retain your clients every year. It's
Yeah,
it's it's based all in intellectual capital. And for those of you who maybe haven't purchased a business or haven't gone down that path, or maybe you're thinking about it, that's such a key thing to recognize what are, and I love exactly what you said, what are the risks when you're going to buy a business. And in any service-based firm, such as the firm you were talking about, being focused on intellectual capital, the labor is so important, and then that client base is so important. And you really have to have a good understanding of what those are. And sometimes, as you described, in these small firms, you don't necessarily have the luxury of doing as much due diligence as you would like because you're trying to keep it confidential to a certain degree, at least until you
right.
know it's going to
Yeah,
go through.
yeah. And I talk about, being aware of attrition and other things, but I didn't have, I was naive to that as well. I think, well, everyone loves Dave. I mean, who's going to leave here, but I was going to say something. So anyway, we were waiting on this appraisal. So I had this job. Actually, I flew down to Dallas. I had this job offer because I just didn't know if this thing was going to go through or not. It was taking so long. And so
What
my
was the
mom
job
was
offer for?
a position within probably about a mid-sized accounting firm down in
Okay.
Dallas, like a
Okay.
tax senior manager. Would have been on a partnership track, um, but again, the one thing that held me back was that my mom was still here. I mean, she's still alive, and it's just because our family was so tight. I mean, I always have felt this responsibility, right? And so
Hmm.
I would I was going to take it. I was real close to taking it, but I just couldn't. I couldn't leave just because I felt like I had to take care of mom. And even though I have another sibling now in the area, but I didn't at the time. And so I'm waiting on this appraisal for the SBA loan to go through. And it's so funny because I got the day that my appraisal came through to support the purchase price, I got a call from our regional manager. He actually sent me a text message at 4 a.m. and said we need to talk. I mean, I knew this was coming, but so the day
So this is your regional manager at
yeah,
BMO,
yeah. So
and you
the day
started going down this path because you were worried that you might get the axe.
Yeah, and basically the day that I got my appraisal came forward, he informed me that, and no one knew I was looking at this. He said that
Hmm.
my job was being eliminated, and it, and like I said, I could see for months that this was going to be coming, or at least if not a year beforehand. But he goes, "So what are you going to do?" And I just kind of snickered to myself at that. I'm not quite sure yet. But I knew, but so I was kind of forced into it, to be honest with you, but that's okay. I mean, the first couple of years were pretty rough, but and you and I have had conversations about that. We'd gone to
Yeah, so
war.
I want to. I'm going to stop you right there
Yeah,
because those first couple years, it's interesting. I've talked about my faith on previous podcasts, and other guests have as well. Um, e- Everything happens for a reason, and you say you were forced into it, but you took the proactive measure of you had been through this corporate acquisition concept before. You were well aware of what could take place, and so you started looking, and you kind of followed your childhood path of, okay, let's at least entertain the idea of going into business for myself.
yeah,
You
yeah.
found a firm, and lo and behold, you get axed, and you end up being in business for yourself. It took some time to get there. You said you were 46, 47.
Yeah, I had a 1-year-old baby.
You had a 1-year-old. Okay, now
Yeah,
help us get into your mindset because a couple episodes ago we talked about fear and the fear of failure. You must have, given all the circumstances you just described, been terrified.
yeah. In many ways, because I'm a very self-conscious person, and that goes back to me being really, I was a very fat kid, and that. But I've always been, and that's always also been a hurdle in my life is being so worried about what everyone thinks about me and what we do. Um, you know, Looking back, I wish I would have done this 30 years earlier, to be honest with you. But um, I was always a guy that, one of my biggest regrets in my life is that I never joined the military. And I didn't do it because I'm one of these idiots that thinks he knows too much. And I was afraid that I probably have the biggest chest in the military because I'd be doing nothing but push-ups, because I'm just too opinionated about things. And that's why I just, my stint in the corporate world just, you know, as you and I both know, it's not the people that have the brains that really advance in many
Yeah,
situations.
yeah. But I love that
I,
you're so willing to share your vulnerabilities and your weaknesses, and I think that's so important for all of us as entrepreneurs because sometimes we think, "Oh, I'm the only one like this," or "What's wrong with me?" And we all have different vulnerabilities and different
yeah,
weaknesses, and certainly our life experiences to a huge degree shape us. For you, you just described perfectly. Part of the reason you didn't do some of these things is because you were a little bit heavier growing up, and people obviously made fun of you, and so what other people thought about you really played a big mental impact on some of
huge,
the decisions
right?
you made.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah. I'm a big
it,
pleaser, and that's it's like, I'm so worried about pleasing everyone. I do way too much for clients that I should be. They're not, or I should, well, that I should be charging for is what I should say. That I,
yeah.
you know,
Well, but
um,
that's the beauty of life and being an entrepreneur, quite frankly, is you learn, okay, where to give, where not to give. But what I love about there's advantages and disadvantages to everything, right?
right,
My guess is if I talk to any one of your clients, and I know this to be the case, they'd say you have some of the best customer service that they've ever experienced. And sometimes, we can dive more into this in a bit for new business owners, and quite frankly, even for mature business owners, it can be a challenge finding that right balance, especially in a consulting or a service business. When do you charge? When do you not charge?
right,
Um, so I very much feel for you there, and I think a lot of people in service industries go through that same struggle. But here you are with a business. You've closed on an SBA loan, so you've got debt now that
hmm,
you have to pay regardless of what happens in the business. Like, you're going on a huge limb, Dave, at
yeah.
46 or 47 with
Oh,
a
I know,
1-year-old
I know,
baby.
yeah,
And, looking back now, I mean, as you said, you wish you would have done it 30 years ago. But tell us about one of the things that is so daunting to people who are thinking about making the jump from the corporate world into the world of entrepreneurism and starting their own business is that fear. And for you, you had a couple of activities that kind of jolted you in, whether you liked it or not. You took the
hmm,
initiation, and then the appraisal came on the same day you got called and said your job's being eliminated, moving it elsewhere. How did you, as a human being, deal with the inevitable extreme volatility, the high highs and the low lows that come with being in business? Those first couple of years had to be tough with labor,
yeah,
intellectual capital, everything being so new. How did you get through that?
yeah. That's a good question because there's nothing that causes me more stress than financial stress. And having that debt, I mean, there were nights I just wouldn't sleep because I was so worried about how I was going to pay this debt back. And because basically I financed, I don't know, 80% of it or more. And,
Mhm.
I had to borrow from my 401k plan or IRA to get the down payment down. And, um, but I don't know. I mean, again, sometimes being naive and stupid is a kind of a good thing. But I just,
Ignorance is bliss. I
yeah,
mean, it really,
yeah,
and for
you know,
me, I've talked about that, and it doesn't really matter what age. At 22 or 23, whatever the age was when we started the company, I was so dumb, but I was so naively blissful
yeah,
until
right, right. Well, yeah, and again, my real training in the accounting world, like yours was a big four firm where you
Mhm.
got the best of the best training. You had very smart people you're working with, and I always made this mistaken assumption that everyone thinks that everyone's got that kind of training or those capabilities, right? And I come up here, and none of the people here at any well, there at the one time there was one of the employees had a CPA, but I mean
Mhm.
she could have done much better work. Let's just say that. But anyway,
Mhm.
but the culture here was so different. Yeah, I mean, I committed to keeping the people on. I wasn't going to fire anybody. Yeah, because the one big risk when you buy a firm like this or a small office is that they've got the relationships,
Yeah.
and what happened was, I mean, it was a very, I mean, I thought I bought a house of cards after about a year here, because what had happened was one of the employees, I don't know, she got upset about something, and I don't know, I'm not one to intentionally try to make someone feel bad. I mean, sometimes my
Hmm.
tone of voice comes across as, or I say something very awkwardly, but my heart is never. I mean, I always live by the golden rule. I mean, I would never. I don't care if you're a janitor, because I was one too. I'm not gonna. I treat you just as if you're a multi-million-dollar client. I mean, that's how you treat people. And
Yeah.
but she got upset about something, so she left, and then ironically, this person who, so I hired someone else, and my receptionist slash data entry bookkeeper person didn't like this new person I hired, so she left. And those two former employees could not stand each other, but I was a common enemy, so they joined forces and had all of our client lists. They sent out all these solicitation letters to all of our clients, and I'm like I wasn't even 18 months into this business, and my clients are bringing in this letter to me saying, "Hey, what did you see this?" I'm like, holy buckets, so I'm thinking,
Yeah.
that at that point I was really stressing out, because I thought I got this huge debt on the books now, for me anyway, and like, how am I going to pay this back? Everyone's going to leave, and so basically I took over almost every decent relationship, because I had to. I had to, because these people didn't know me from Adam. And
Yeah.
ironically, they thought I was some big city boy because I came from Eau Claire, right? And this is a rural community of 3,600 people, and
Hmm.
um, so I had to show them that, even though they thought I didn't look like a farmer, I didn't look however that looks, and but it all worked out. But basically, you get yourself to this, so you can talk the same language they do. And again, it's not about judging people, but it's just what having the flexibility to be able to know your client base, and come to their level. And that I got from my dad, because my dad probably gave away his business, is probably what happened, because he felt he had a lot of little old ladies and people have limited income resources, and I'm sure he took big losses on a lot of his prescription sales because he felt sorry for him.
Yeah.
But there was never any, and I love this, but I love this environment, because like you and I know, when you're working in a big, whether it's a big bank or wealth management with high wealth individuals, you're always putting on this facade where you're kissing their rear ends, you're telling how great they are, and which is nice. I mean, I don't have any problem doing it. I mean, because I love learning from people of high wealth and high
But it's
achievement,
very
how to get there.
but it's very, very superficial, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's funny you say that. I've been in the white collar world and I've been in the blue collar,
yeah.
and both are necessary for our economy and both do great things. But where I have found the most authentic, genuine, incredible human beings, salt of the earth, is in the blue collar industries, the farmers and the tradesmen and the construction
Right,
workers and the
right.
people that pick up our trash. And I have learned so much from them about what it really means to live and be decent and take care of other people and be humble and not judge, and just some really important qualities that I think when you look at some of the most affluent in our society have never been afforded the blessing of seeing that, and I think that's
Hmm.
why we see so many of them. And I'm not disparaging the wealthy, or I think all of us want to live the American dream, but what I'm trying to say is if you either are given that wealth or you don't recognize the blessing that you've received from a wealth perspective, and that no matter what your pocketbook is, every human is the same and we're all equal, and we're all sinner that need God's love and forgiveness, not from nobody's better than the other person.
Hmm.
I think they miss out so much of the beauty of other people and life. And what you're describing, correct me if I'm wrong, is when you got into this CPA firm and you had to take over the relationships, you had to really understand what the farmer's world was like. And you learned so much from that.
Oh yeah, I mean, there was nothing. Thank God for the internet at that time, because farmers have a whole different lingo as far as how they refer to different pieces of equipment,
Yeah.
even the animals to some degree, and I could be 60 miles south, and they would refer to a disc mine, for example, by a different name, and so. But I remember, I was sitting this first year. I was, sitting in these client meetings with my predecessor, And he goes, and he said, this isn't going to work. It's taking too much time. He said, you got to just take these clients on yourself, a lot of them. So, I'm sitting there one on one with these people I'd never met before, and as soon as they'd walk out the door, I'm googling here to see what what the heck they're talking about. But I
Kind
became,
of
yeah,
I mean, we've all, one of our previous guests said it's kind of like, these people don't know, I have no clue what I'm doing. Fake it till you make it. Not in
exactly,
a
yeah,
negative way, but that's the reality. When you throw yourself into the fire, as you did buying a business, and relationships are so important, there's only one way to do it. You put your head down and you figure it out, because that's your only option. If you're going to make it work, is you figure
right.
it out. You don't whine and cry and complain and yada, yada, yada. You just move forward. And that's what you did. I love that.
Well, yeah, and ironically, now our little office is now considered like a real these specialists in egg accounting and tax work, which is kind of, which I shouldn't be laughing about that, but yeah, I did, yeah, I learned a lot just teaching myself in the land, about the industry in the first few years I was here. But
So it's been 10 years.
yeah,
Things are going well, as you just described. You guys have really solidified your niche in the marketplace as the tax specialists for all things agricultural. Not that you don't do other things, but
right.
it makes a lot of sense in the community that you're in. What advice would you give, Dave, to people that are maybe similar in your situation? They're stuck in the corporate world and they've got all these responsibilities and they've got family, and they're, just terrified to go out on their own, but they're extremely miserable, and they know that they have that entrepreneurial bug, and they're not sure how to make that leap or take that jump. What advice would you give to them?
Hmm. That's a good question. You know, I don't know, because my situation may be a little bit different just because I was kind of forced into it. But I think I think you've got, I mean, this practical piece of me. I think you've got to be real practical about. I think to some degree. I think you can't let fear get in your way, but you also have to be able to kind of plan in your head what if this doesn't work out, then what, but not be afraid to let that hold you back. Like again, my biggest issue growing up, or I mean, when I was younger, was that I don't have the capital to do it. I don't have the, I mean, it's all I worried about was I don't have this reserve of cash to live off of if things go sour. Of course, I always thought, being a partner at some firm was going to be that kind of that entrepreneur type, situation, but you're always playing politics and following the rules. But I think you've got to be strong. You've got to be committed to it. Um, there's no such thing as a 40-hour work week. You can't, it's different. When you're an employee, you can kind of leave things at the door after 8 to 10 hours and go out and play softball, bowling, socializing, whatever you want to do. But you can't do that when you make that jump to be a business owner. You've got to be fully committed to it, and not that it does. It dominates, for me anyway. It dominates my life in many ways. I mean, you can't get complacent, because if you do, you're going to lose everything. Because the struggle that I have, we talked about billing and what's your value to people is, I think as in the accounting world, we're probably the worst profession in the world trying to come up with what our billing rate should be, because
Yeah.
we just kind of say, well, what's the market going to bear, and we do it, right?
Yeah.
And because that probably holds me back, because I'm just, not that I'm cheap, but I think even spending $300 on a tax return to me is a bunch of money.
Yeah.
Not in
Well, and
today's
it's,
world, but
yeah,
but you
well, yeah, not with this inflation, but it's
yeah,
in any service firm.
right,
I think that's always a challenge, especially when you're a community of 3,600 people, and you want to talk about the farming industry and the volatility that they have.
right, right,
Last week we had Mark McWilliams in the winery industry, and they were growing grapes, and there are so many acts of God that can completely
yeah,
destroy your, what insurance companies consider acts of God, whether it's tornadoes or hurricanes, depending on where you are. You talk
right,
about volatility, every business has it, but then you add the farming industry, the cow's not feeling well, or the soil's not quite right because rain didn't come. And so for you, as someone who primarily services those individuals, you're always thinking about them, and when they've had good years and bad years. And how
absolutely,
do you
yeah,
stare a farmer in the face when they've had a really terrible couple years of either they're dairy farmers or they're crop farmers, and the commodities markets have been garbage. And now you're going to try to say, hey, well, you got to pay me this big amount for a tax return. I mean, I sympathize with that
Yeah.
challenge for you as a service provider, because it's a real
Oh yeah.
struggle.
And it's hard because like the dairy farmers, for example, their milk price, they have no control over it. I mean,
Yeah.
their milk price is set by the government, and then then the co-ops that they sell their milk to, or the corporations, they give them premiums, but still the baseline is always, the starting point is always the class 3 milk price. So in their minds they think, well, you know, my prices aren't going up. Why should I have to pay you anymore? I mean, that's just
Yeah.
that's the mentality. But
Yeah.
back to your original question, though, I mean, you really have to know. Um, Again, I was somewhat naive, but you've got to. But I think you've got to be ready to put in the work and be in it for the long run, because, like I said, your business is always in the back of your mind. I mean, if it's not, you shouldn't be an entrepreneur, because there's and I and you can't be afraid to do things. I mean, you've got, whether it's cleaning toilets on a Saturday afternoon if you have to, or doing things that, I mean, there's nothing that's above you when you are self-employed in a small business, and I have no problem. People, I mean, there have been days when I sit up at the front desk. I mean, not recently, but when early on, where everyone's gone, and I'm the big business owner, right? But I'm sitting at the front desk answering phones and doing my work from the computer up there. And I don't know. I mean, our clients, I think, appreciate that we're human beings. I mean, you don't call and get an automated phone line. You have to sit on hold and press 5, press 8, all this stuff, and you know
No question about it.
I'm
And
very
it,
I'm
it-
very
you're,
old fashioned that way. I mean,
yeah.
we are, it's still a relationship business, and I know a lot of the big firms are getting away from it now, but it just, at this point, it kind of still works for us. I mean, I realize there are things we could be doing differently, but to try to automate some things, but you still can't get away from the human element of it.
Yeah, well, and I think, not only do your clients appreciate it, your employees appreciate it. And I think what I love what you just said, that too many people in business, especially in the upper echelon, and I'm not just talking about the corporate world, I'm talking about people who have been successful in small business and grow to medium and then large. They let their ego get in the way of accomplishing even greater success, because there's this mindset. There's a lot of people that don't, but there's this mindset, well, I've done this, I'm not going to go clean toilets. And you got to check all that at the door when you're an entrepreneur. And as you said, you can't become complacent no matter what size of business you are, because the beauty of the free market system is you rest on your laurels. You can bet there's going to be a competitor
Right,
nipping at your heels,
right.
ready to take that market share from you. So you always have to, regardless of how successful you've become, check your ego at the door and be willing to do anything and everything for your customers, for your employees, and have that mentality, which is what you just described.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder a little bit about, and again, as we get older, we always talk about, the younger generations and what we see and what we hear, but, um, I think and this is only, it's just very, analogous. I mean, it's, not analogous, what I'm trying to say. But I've talked to a few younger people about, because I need help, and we're down an employee. And I've had a couple guys that I've talked to, and they ended up backing out after they accepted an offer. But I've mentioned that. I mean, this little office could be a gold mine for somebody in the future, because the competition is just not there right now where I'm at.
Hmm.
We've got a
Hmm.
guy that's retiring. H&R Block, who used to do a lot of book work here in Bloomer. They left the market last year, um, and we're getting more and more requests for business. But I've mentioned to a few younger people that this would be a great opportunity for you, and nobody seems to want it. Nobody, they don't want the headaches of it, and I don't. I'm concerned about what's being taught in schools today, because I mean, not just from a content standpoint, as much as a, you know, I wouldn't say
Oh,
it's that I wouldn't say it's that people don't want to work. That's not my point. But whether it's maybe people are finding ways to make a lot more money without having to work so hard, because but the American dream doesn't seem to be put into people's heads anymore. The way it's a different world we're living in right now, which concerns me. Um,
no question
I
about
suppose
it. And
we can make making TikTok videos, or YouTube videos and monetizing that somehow. But but
Well,
I and that's a whole other world. I do not understand how people make money on it, but they do. And
well, what's
you know,
interesting is, I mean, I think the key point that you're trying to make is it's hard work, and it is all consuming, and I
right?
would tend to agree with you that, and I think there's, when I look at even my generation or younger generations, not to get too political or philosophical, but I've learned so much from them as it relates to recognizing there, and this is a double-edged sword, but life is too short. I'm not going to work for the corporate man for 30 years and be slave away and be yelled at and hate my life. I'm going to try to live a better life. But I think we've almost gone too far in that direction,
Yeah,
where there's no sense of pride in one's work. And again, I'm generalizing here. So nobody crucify me, because I there's always great examples, and I have some incredible employees, younger employees that are just amazing, and great customer service in the coffee and bike shop that a business partner and I own. But we're kind of losing the sense of pride in our work, the responsibility and commitment to other people. It's not all about me. It's not about what my video looks like in my Facebook and my TikTok. It's about recognizing that there are other people in this world, and they're important too. And so
hmm
my actions have consequences for them. And I think what that's kind of what you're describing is, there's the advantage of these younger generations in terms they don't just kind of do what you describe. Well, I was told I need to do this, and I was told it, and I very much grew up in that world.
yeah,
And you just kind of follow along what other people expect you to do or want you to do. But balancing that with, you do have a responsibility to other people and to your employees and to your customers and to your family. And sometimes you have to do something you don't like for an extended period of time, because you have a responsibility to people and for commitments that you made. And you can't just get what you want overnight. It takes time to accomplish the goals that you're trying to accomplish, and patience. And I think that's the biggest thing that I see missing. And I want your take on that. And I've talked about this so much, is these phones, these phones we have are
hmm
creating short neural networks that give us
absolutely.
anything we
Yeah,
want in a
yeah,
matter of 2 seconds. And in the business world, nothing happens that quickly. Nothing good comes overnight. And as I always tell my nieces and nephews, patience brings good things to those who are willing to wait for it. And we've really lost that. And I'm a victim of this myself. I'm very, very impatient, and I'm trying to learn as I get older. But I think that's kind of what you're describing and what you're seeing, right?
yeah. I do. I think. I mean, and I completely agree with you. I think everyone's page or attention span today is about the length of my thumb. And um, I will give you. I mean, but this loyalty piece and this taking ownership of what you do is really a big deal. I mean, my two employees I have right now, one is 60 and one is 34 or 5. They're not young employees. Um, and if my one retires, I'm really in big trouble. So I've got to keep her happy. But
Hey,
here's the
employee, I hope you're listening to this. You got a lot of leverage over
yeah.
Mr. Adler here. So
They all have you by the what. I mean, yeah, that Adler CPAs and advisors mad on the front right by our front door is pretty much me laying down. Yeah, I'm not the boss. Believe me, they tell me how things are going to be. But
well, that's often how it should be.
yeah,
Your employees
yeah.
should, to a large degree, dictate certain things because
But
they really
my
are the business.
yeah, but my nephew who's let's see, he's his second year out of law school, so he's doing his residency program over in Appleton area, and we were talking last spring. And I thought I was just stunned. My jaw hit the floor. But this speaks volumes of what you're referring to as far as loyalty and just taking ownership of things. Because so here's my nephew who's a med student, a med grad, and we're talking. I don't know. We were talking about business or something, and I just made this comment. I said, and his name's David as well. I said, David, the issue is, I said, the thing that I really struggle with is that there just seems to be such a lack of loyalty now within the workforce. And he looks at me in a straight face and he said, well, we don't care about loyalty. And I'm like, what? He goes, what do we care about loyalty? He said, what we, what we're just worried about what how things are going to benefit us. And I'm thinking that didn't come from my sister. I know that. Then it certainly
Mm.
didn't come from his father. So like, where are these ideas? Where are these people being taught this stuff? And and that's why when I go back to this follow your heart versus head thing, I mean that was always a big deal in the 80s and 90s. Oh, follow your heart and it'll lead you to the green pastures. Blah blah blah. I mean, in many ways, it's a complete crock of what, because I mean, you have to follow your heart, but you have to be realistic about it.
Yeah.
I
What?
mean,
Yeah,
I would love,
absolutely.
I'd love to be a ballet dancer, but it ain't happening.
well, well,
um, it's
it's
just
funny you say that the loyalty piece, and but you know who I think is also responsible for that? I mean, obviously, I think in society in general, we're becoming that way, and we could talk all about the
yeah.
family unit is so important. I think our country and the acknowledgement of God in our country, and but setting that aside,
Mhm.
we try not to get too political on this podcast, but the corporate world is often very disloyal too. And so when you've seen or you've grown up, I see this. It's sad that we see this this tension, and I saw this better than anything. My dad, being a UPS driver, growing up
Mhm.
with the union versus management, that was the whole theme. It was union versus management,
Yeah.
and it created such a terrible culture between the management at UPS and the union. What's the union for UPS? The major one or the
Well,
big
it's a big
union?
transportation one, I think.
Yeah, I don't remember the union, but anyways,
Yeah.
but what when it came down to it is when he most needed the union to stand up for him, they were in bed with upper management, and it didn't turn out well. But I,
Right.
I believe that there was a place for unions way back when,
Oh
and
yeah.
I think regulations have basically um, it was for the security of workers in the workplace and what have you. And now it's just created such a toxic corporate culture, and I grew up with that. And I think so. You see this worker sense of, well, these companies don't care about me, and they're not going to be loyal to me. And just like you experienced in the corporate world, and I recognize sometimes there's downsizing and what have you, but the corporations, we're seeing mass layoffs across the tech industry and what have you, and there's not a lot of loyalty to the employee sometimes. And so
Yeah.
the employees are more and more gaining this mentality, well, they don't care about me, so why should I care about them? And I think turning this to the optimistic, there's a huge opportunity there. I believe that companies that recognize the value of their employees and treat them as if they are as important as they are, you will gain that sense of loyalty and trust over time. Now, it's really hard to do, and there's always going to be bad apples where that's not going to happen. But I think we've lost that whole sense of responsibility to each other on both sides of the fence.
Yeah. Well, ultimately that and the fact that a capitalist society doesn't work unless the morals and morality is embedded in it, and we've lost that. Everything is about the almighty dollar, and I mean,
That's a great point, Dave.
building wealth is awesome, but you can't. But no one gives a rat's rear end about anything but money. I mean, you're seeing it, and now we're seeing, unfortunately, you're seeing the infiltration of politics into the corporations. I mean, remember back in the day, it was the big corporations were the evil guy, and now they're in bed with government. I mean, they're
Yeah.
if you are standing for anything that has a different political viewpoint as what the head of these corporations or big businesses are standing for, you're being let go, you're being fired, you're being demoted, whatever. There's no room for thought anymore, and even
Yeah.
discussion, and the fact that you know corporations and businesses are now, what was the number one role of a business? Maximize shareholder wealth. That's not that way anymore. Um,
Yeah.
it's sad. And, back in the 80s and 90s, we had the big tech bubble in the 90s. In the 80s, we had, things were not great. You had just tons of small business popping up, small entrepreneurs. You're not
Yeah.
seeing that today. I mean, that's the scary part to me, is that everything is being consolidated.
Yeah, it is.
If the companies are buying up their competition, they're folding them all into, especially in the tech sectors, but, you know, they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And there's not, nobody's seeing, I mean, I'm not seeing a bunch of small businesses popping up like we used to. And that's a
But I believe
concern
that
of mine.
yeah,
Hopefully it's cyclical, but you just don't know.
Yeah, but I couldn't agree with you more. I think the climate for business has become so overburdensome, and the amount of time it takes to generate some rewards because of the climate is people just say, it's not worth it. It's not worth, as you described, sacrificing my entire life and it always being dominating over me. And but set that aside, I think that means there's a lot of opportunities. If there's people that, if we're seeing that there's a lot of maybe they're not starting as much as they are, there are opportunities. So I want to talk about the where you see those opportunities. If you were going to tell your sons who are not quite at that age yet, how are they old now? How old are they now?
They are 11 and 9.
11 and 9. So they can start being entrepreneurial, but probably not opening up their own restaurant or anything quite yet. But before we get to that, what's your biggest failure?
My biggest failure. Oh my gosh. That's a good question because I've had so many of that.
You sound like me.
Yeah.
Well, and the reason I
Well,
asked that,
I don't know. I mean, in many ways, and this is getting in my personal life more than anything else. But um, I was, and I don't know that I've learned very well. But I've been married twice before. Actually, this is my third marriage, and in my mind, those were my two prior marriages were very big failures in my life. I was raised in a very conservative Catholic family, and divorce was just not something you did.
mhm,
And I there are reasons for it, but I mean, I not. And the thing is, you don't know. I look back at those a lot of times, and I wonder, is this? But that's my personal life. But
yeah,
I think it somewhat relates to even my business life early on. My career was because you talk about this small. I was very impulsive when I was younger, and if I got panicky about something, I'd do something different, or and you know, I look at how I was taught, and a lot of the things my dad told me or my mom told me, I laughed at, but yet that practical piece of things is what I wish I would have stuck to it because the one thing I don't do, when I mean I should looking back you might disagree with me, but when you always when you get upset about something and you want to make a decision right then, I mean I try not to do that as much as I can.
that's
My
wise.
but yet because when you make emotions on it or decisions based on pure emotion, it's not for the right reason. But I've done that. I've hired people because out of panic, because I've needed people, knowing that it wasn't going to work out, but you needed a body, and
Yep,
um, but in
we
many
both
ways,
been there.
yeah. I mean, my biggest failure, I would think, business wise, is just jumping at things. And again, this all goes back to like emotional reasons. I mean, making career decisions because you were doing it for the wrong reason. You were doing it because you thought it was going to make other people happy. Again, me being the pleaser. Um, Not sticking to things, or not giving things a real chance. I mean, 3.5 years, up until this position was probably the longest I'd been anywhere, and until I got
Wow.
to like BMO Harris,
Yeah.
and um,
But I think you
I
make
was,
such a good point, Dave. I think that is so incredibly powerful because it is life in general is a balance between emotions and rationality, right?
right, right,
And there's a place for emotions and there's a place then and there's a place not for emotions and a place for rationality. And when you're a business owner, kind of what we talked about earlier, it's such a world of highs and lows, of volatility, emotionally speaking, that sometimes it can be so hard to let that, to basically just set that aside and let rationality dictate certain
mm-hmm,
decisions when it's necessary. Because sometimes you don't have the benefit, or it doesn't seem like you have the benefit of time to act or just setting that the emotional aspect aside, because being a business owner with everything that it entails is just one big emotional bargain, and it's such a dominating part of your life and part of being a human being. When you go through something that what I consider traumatic professionally speaking, I think we all struggle that. I think any entrepreneur that says, "Oh yeah, when I need to use rationality, I use rationality, and I can set my emotions aside, and vice versa,"
yeah,
they're lying, because then they're either not human and they're this new thing we
right,
speak of
yeah,
called AI, which we
yeah,
could have a whole nother podcast on that,
right,
or they're just putting out a facade and a face that is completely unrealistic.
yeah,
And so. I'm glad that you brought that up because I think I know I struggle with it daily. I mean, daily, especially when you have failures and quite frankly, even when you have successes.
Yeah. Well, um, you brought up, you asked me earlier, you asked me about advice, but the one thing I forgot to mention then, and I'm jumping around a little bit, but if you're married or you're in a relationship, you really need to have you really need that support structure because it's very easy. And I see it in the farming world. I mean, these people are working 7 days a week, and some of these guys end up marrying a city girl or a girl that's not used to the farm life. They don't understand these people. I mean, there's no leaving the farm, until you get established, you can grow enough to have some help. But um, my wife was very supportive. She didn't really say a whole lot, but she never once said you need to be home by 6 o'clock because blah blah. Because but you really need that if you're going to make this thing go, you're going to take that leap. You need to have people behind you that are going to be understanding of, especially if you're married or have a family, understanding of what it is you're getting into. But
Yeah, I
but
think
yeah,
that's
and to some degree, when I talked about, I wish I would have started 30 years ago. I mean, had I had that big debt, and again, $500,000 of debt may not be a lot to a lot of people, but to me, it was like millions of dollars. And when I bought this place, and that was, I mean, that kept me here. To be honest with you, I mean, had I had that debt 30 years ago, I might be in a whole different spot today because I wouldn't have been bouncing around. Because
yeah.
that was always I don't know why when I was younger, being, commitment was a big deal to me.
Hmm.
I'll never forget when I bought my first house, I was like shaking because I thought this is a 30-year. And I thought I'm stuck in this. I mean, how can I commit to anything for 30 years? And that was the hardest thing. But just and at the time, and then it's scary how fast time goes by.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't believe in 2 months or a month and a half I'm going to be 58 years old. I'm thinking, wasn't I just like 35 like yesterday? And, and you just, and
It's funny
so
you say that because I'm 36 and I feel like I'm 80 and I'm like, boy, wasn't I just like 22 or 23? And I'm not saying I'd want to go back to that, but
right,
what I hear you say and um I don't find it productive for me personally to look back with regrets, but to
right.
look back and say, you know what, that was a mistake, or what can I learn from it? And I think that's so important to not dwell on the past and look back in terms of regret and let it consume you, but learn from it so you don't make the same mistakes and figure out how you can use that to propel you forward.
Yeah, oh, yeah. I mean, when you asked me my biggest failure, I mean, it was kind of hard to, I don't know. I mean, like, how do you, I guess it depends how you define failure, but, you know, I'm relatively successful. I'm in pretty good health for the most part. I can keep up with my two young kids. Um, so I can't, I don't know. I mean, regardless of how I stumbled into things, they all seem to have worked out. And it's kind of like, I mean, the way you and I were raised. I'm sure you sin, you ask for forgiveness, and you get up and you stop dwelling on it, and you move forward. And
Yeah.
so,
Well, and
um,
I love what you just described. You said earlier, so much of our society has been about money, 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 but godliness with contentment is great gain. Being content with what you have, not that you can't pursue the American dream, but so often, and I know I struggle with this, and I think this is almost an entrepreneurial trait. We're living in the future and where we want to go, and we forget to live in the present and just enjoy the process of what we're going through now. Because as
mhm,
you said, time goes by so fast. And if you're always living for the next thing, or you're living in the future, or your mind's somewhere else, as opposed to today, your family, your kids, your customers, your employees, you're going to miss out on life is going to pass you by and you're going to look back and you're like, why didn't I enjoy it when I was there?
right. And again, you've got that balance because I feel like the last 2 years I probably worked more in my life than I've worked the prior 20. Um, and yet it's a different perspective. I don't really enjoy working that much, but it's, if you would have told me when I was 30 that I had to work 70 hours a week, I would have told you to go kiss off. I mean, I wouldn't do it because I was working for somebody else. But when I do it now, and it's like, well, it's just kind of what it is. Um, but it is a balance because, I mean, this past year has been it's like mid to end January until middle of April. I barely see my family.
Yeah,
And
because it's busy season for accountants. I mean, it's busy season. You've
well, yeah,
got
and the fact that our industry is shrinking and is really making it challenging because people are retiring right and left. Enrollments in accounting schools are down 35 to 36%, and more and more people are coming to us, and we like an idiot. I can't say no, and then I find myself creating a real problem because I can't service the clients like I need to be.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
and
It's hard to turn business away, but sometimes you
well, because
have
you don't
to.
you don't
It
know, yeah, and getting rid of the ones you should.
yeah,
That's an even bigger challenge
yeah,
because every year is
absolutely.
different. There's no commitment. I mean, they don't have to keep coming back, and it's like I panic every tax season because I keep thinking how many people are not going to come back this year, and then we have
Yeah,
more. It just never
yeah.
fails. But
But I love what you said, and I wanna hone on, and you've been very gracious with your time, so I don't wanna take too much more of it, but that shift in perspective, you said when you were 30, if you were working 70 hours, no way would you have done it, but now at 57, 58, you have no problem, and it's because, back then you were working for someone else, and now it's for yourself, and you not that you don't view it as work, but it really is until and so for those of you thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, if you think of work in as we describe it as a from a small business perspective or a entrepreneurship perspective, it, you can't really understand what we mean by that until you are in business because it's so different than the work you experience when you're in the corporate world, you're working for someone else. The mindset is so different. I mean, I'm working 7 days a week. Now I try to take more time on Sunday and spend with the family and the kids, but you always have the business on your mind, but it's
mhm.
not the same as punching a clock in and punching a clock out. It's just a whole different world, and there's advantages to that, and there's disadvantages to that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's a huge thing people need to understand before they decide to jump into, being self-employed is that, um, and I mean, we see it. I mean, you see it all the time, and um, people think they got this great idea, and they might, but the unfortunate thing, everyone else, a lot of, I mean, most people have a lot of the same ideas, but it's a matter of commitment and whether or not they're really willing to put what it takes to get into it. And again, I working this much. I don't know. I'm in the office today, obviously, because I had to leave yesterday because of my tooth issue. Because I was having this infection in my gums, and I just couldn't function. Um, but again,
But you
you
had the
know,
flexibility. That's the interesting thing.
yeah,
The other, we always talk about the downsides, but obviously there's a potential financial upsides, but you take a lot of risk. But flexibility is a huge piece.
oh
When
yeah,
one of my nieces or nephews need to do something, or your tooth is aching, and you can plan around that and schedule around that, and that comes with a huge sacrifice of okay, so you can take some time off on Friday, you'll have to do it on Sunday, but flexibility is a nice piece of it. Now, I almost use the word freedom, which being a business owner is a complete opposite of freedom.
yep, right.
So that's why I refrain from doing so. But flexibility, as you just described, is
Yeah.
one of the advantages.
But it is, in many ways, it is freedom. I mean, even though you're married to your job or your business, I should say. Um, but you're right. I mean, I'm the same way with my employees. If they need to go somewhere, get out of here. I mean, I think that's one of the things. There's no clock punching. There's no, as long as the work gets done, that's all I care about. But yeah, my kids go to school a half hour away, and every time there's an event, and I mean, I try to be there if I can, or parent teacher
Yeah.
conference. I've got to be there. Um, yeah, but things come up at various appointments. I had this real bizarre. I mean, I ended up. I mean, everything was normal, but I had some potential medical issues that turned out to be nothing. But between end of November and January, I think I had to go to Eau Claire, for doctor's appointments and various scans like 10 times, and
Yeah.
yeah, I'm keeping the local hospital in business, I think. But
Yeah.
everything's normal. But yet,
Yeah.
just some weird things that came up, and not, everything completely normal. But they wanted to
Yeah.
run all these different tests just to make sure. But again, how easy would that be to leave work?
Yeah.
If I was an employee somewhere, and but for my employees, if they had the same things going on, it wouldn't even be a question.
Well, that's a
Because
sign of good culture, and which
my employees are my family. I spend as much time with them as I do with my wife and kids, and
yeah.
you know but it's just something that it's become just a way of life for me. um I
I,
don't.
I I really like that, Dave. Business, being a business owner and an entrepreneur, it's a way of life. That's a great way to describe it. It is a way of life.
Sure.
And it's kind of being a farmer is a way of life. Being a business owner, no matter what industry, it's a way of life. And I think that's so succinctly put. I want to conclude here with we've covered a lot of ground. We've shot the breeze over a lot of things. So, listeners, thank you for bearing with some of our wonky CPA conversation. But is there anything, Dave, that you think we have missed or we haven't touched on that if your son, your 11-year-old son, was 20 and said, Dad, I want to be an entrepreneur, is there anything we've missed that, uh, from an advice perspective, that you would give to him that you want to share with our audience?
Oh, that's a good question. And I kind of I chuckle or I snicker a little bit because as CPAs, what do? We are the naysayers about everything, right? I mean, that's kind of because whether I give legal advice or I'm giving business advice, it's always I plan for divorce. It's like okay, you guys want to go into business together, but what happens if it doesn't work out? I mean, no one goes into business thinking about worst case scenario. Nobody wants to start anything. Nobody wants to get married thinking that, yeah, we're going to be divorced in 3 to 5 years. But they're just, so I'm always like being the devil's advocate about everything. Cause it's kind of my job, right? Or
Yeah.
my role. Um,
Yeah.
I guess all I would say, I mean, my biggest thing would say, okay, what have you thought that your idea out? I mean, what is it you really want to do? How are you going to get there? I mean, what's your plan? I mean, I'm not big into the big business plan things, but I think you have to have some sort of plan as far as realistic estimates about, what kind of revenues you may want to have, or what kind of capital you've got reserves you're going to have to live on. I mean, I'd say you okay, bud, but what do you need to live on? If I were you, you're gonna try to have at least this much in savings because if things go sour, you're gonna have to survive. Um, it's just a matter of getting out. I mean, that kind of held me back when I was younger, was really not having the capital to start something out. I think I mentioned
Yeah.
that, but even when you're buying an established business, there's no guarantee, but at least you've got some sort of, you know, client base you're buying, but it's a matter of, again, it's balancing your heart with the practical realities of what it is you want to do.
Yeah.
I mean, have you really done your research? Is there a market for this? Do you think that it's something that people are going to, get on? I mean, whether it's an existing business, why are they? I'd always ask why are people selling, for one thing? I mean, are they retiring? Is it not? I mean, have you looked at their financials? I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
If you're looking to buy a business. Yeah,
right, right.
absolutely.
Um, so
No, that's great advice. I think you got to balance the practicality, but I think there's also a piece to just throwing yourself into the fire sometime, not
yeah,
without any have thought process, but necessity is the mother of invention. And
yeah,
just like you described, and as a lot of entrepreneurs, if you want it bad enough, no matter what comes your way, you will figure it out. You will. I mean, and maybe it's not going to end the way you anticipate, but don't let fear of failure hold you back, or having,
right,
we
right.
can get in this stage of analysis paralysis. I think that's a common thing with accountants
Absolutely.
and
Oh yeah,
CPAs, is
right,
analysis paralysis. And there's certainly a level of, you need some analysis, but you're never going to have 100% of the answers. It's just not the way it is. So you've got to eventually look yourself in the mirror and say, okay, I've done what I believe is the best due diligence research. I've talked to people who can provide advice here. Now, when I see myself in the mirror, am I committed? Do I really want this? Am I willing to do whatever it takes to make this work?
right.
And I think that's so critical to what you just described.
Absolutely. Yeah. And but I think you mentioned a really good point. Talk to people you trust about it. See what they, and it's and, you don't want to find yes people, but people that who have maybe done things before that. And that was always a big thing that held me back. I was always afraid to ask people that had succeeded in
Mhm.
life for support because I thought it's kind of like I never talked to professors in college because they for some reason back then they intimidated me, and I just I don't know, I was
Yeah.
always afraid to ask for help, and that's or advice, and that I think if you're gonna do something like this, um, it's important to find if it's something that you really. I mean, I had obviously years of experience to know what I was doing to some degree, at least the technical pieces of things, but
Yeah.
Yeah, find
But
people
I
that you can.
remember you and I talked a lot about business in the early years,
Oh yeah.
and we talked as entrepreneurs about what would we do in this scenario, what to do in this scenario. But I think that's don't be afraid to ask for advice. I think that's really good, excellent advice because sometimes we can be hesitant, but
And
I
it's
think those
amazing
who
how
ask,
much, yeah, it's amazing how much people who have succeeded are willing to share.
yeah,
Because and that was always, I was always afraid to ask people because I thought, I thought they would just like turn me away and laugh at me, but they're not. I mean, people that are successful, that are genuine human beings, want other people to succeed as well.
they do,
And
they
and I,
do.
I wish I would have like understood that better when I was younger.
Well, our listeners have the benefit of learning from our mistakes and what we didn't do.
Right.
Dave, I cannot thank you enough for joining us on the Andrew Holland podcast. You've given a lot of excellent advice. Thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing some of your failures because the whole point of this podcast is for all of us on a weekly basis to convene, talk to other entrepreneurs, and talk about the struggles everybody else or what you have gone through because I find it very motivating. I know our listeners find it motivating because sometimes it does feel like a lonely world, but that's certainly not the case, and that's why we're here. Thank you so much, Dave.
Thanks, Andrew. Great talking to
Have a
you.
great, yeah, have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, man. You too.
Mm. Well, that's all the time that we have for this week's episode of the Andrew Holland podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Really enjoyable conversation with Dave and a lot of great advice there. We covered so many topics. If you have any questions about what we talked about or there's anything you want me to ask Dave for you, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com. Of course, you can always tweet at me. My Twitter handle is @HollandPodcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, the Andrew Holland Podcast, to see the video version of this week's episode. This podcast is only as good as we collectively make it, so if there's things you want us to talk about, guests you want us to have, please don't hesitate to reach out. Also, remember, this is a podcast where we talk about financial topics. Sometimes we have legal advice, sometimes we have accounting advice. Don't ever take anything you hear on this podcast or any other podcast as the absolute gospel truth. Always make sure you're consulting the appropriate professionals in your area to get the best advice for your situation. Thank you again so much for joining us this week. You all have an excellent week, and we'll talk again next Wednesday. Thank you for listening to the Andrew Holland Podcast. Be sure to visit our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com, for additional content on business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Andrew Holland Podcast, to get notifications when new podcasts have been released. And lastly, follow us on Twitter, @Holland Podcast. That's @Holland Podcast for all the conversations we're having outside the podcast. Thanks again so much for joining us this week. Have a great day, and we'll talk again next week.